G'day, eh? My name's RJ. This is Killer Canuck, and together, we're looking through Canada's horror history. Having just dodged obscenity charges in an Ontario courtroom over their student film, The Columbus of Sex, McMaster University graduates Ivan Reitman and Dan Goldberg were hungry to get their careers rolling. Self-claiming to have been just kicking around Toronto in 1971, they decided to crank out a movie on credit in the lucrative horror genre. They and 12 friends managed to raise $12,000 and formed a production company of which they all held equal shares. They struck a deal with Bellevue Pathé Film Labs, which would eventually become Astral Media, the head of which was a man named Harold Greenberg. In exchange for access to the editing equipment, they told Pathé they would be paid the majority of their money after the movie was finished and sold. With the minimal funding and equipment they had, they got to work. Cannibal Girls, released in 1973 by American International as a drive-in double feature with raw meat, is a Canadian grindhouse horror comedy directed by Ivan Reitman and starring pre-SCTV Eugene Levy and Andrea Martin in both of their feature starring debuts. AIP shipped the film with a warning bell gimmick that would blare whenever something too scary was about to happen. This wasn't included in Reitman and Goldberg's initial film. The Blu-ray ships with 2 audio tracks, one with the warning bell and one without. If you watch the track with the warning bell, because let's be honest, why wouldn't you want to? The movie opens with a narration explaining what the bell is all about.
During the showing of Cannibal Girls, in consideration of those of you with delicate sensibilities, a special warning bell has been installed. It will signal you when to close your eyes to avoid certain scenes of a shocking nature.
A couple is walking along the coast and being stalked by someone who just learned about found footage filmmaking. They are about to make love on what looks like the quilt their nan made for them, when the warning bell tells the audience that they're about to be interrupted by their bloody Valentine. After the cold open, we get an uncomfortable series of credits over the daily lives of 3 girls on a farm. It's here we learn that the dialogue was developed by the cast from an original story. That's right. Reitman started shooting without a script. They had a 13-page outline. He and Goldberg came up with the tagline, "These girls eat men," and they reverse engineered a movie around that. Eugene Levy, who attended McMaster at the same time as Reitman and Goldberg, albeit not many classes.
I mean, honestly, those years I spent so much time doing plays and just hanging out with the film board people that I didn't go to class at all.
Has said that some scenes were scripted and the major beats were laid out, but for the most part, all of the actors improvised their lines. And remember, this is Levy and Martin before their training with Second City. After the credits, we joined Cliff, played by Eugene Levy in his absolutely incredible afro mustache and sideburns combo, as well as Gloria, played by Andrea Martin, as they're surrounded by frozen Canadian isolation. They play a young couple out of Toronto, who are trying to get to Farnhamville, Ontario. After some questionable advice,
the car understands. You have to be nice to it.
And some TLC, they're on the road once again. They roll up to a garage to ask for directions, and so Gloria can grab a postcard. There's a man asking the mechanic if he has seen his sister, shown in a photograph. The mechanic shakes his head and then gives Cliff directions to a motel down the road. This mechanic is played by Rick McGuire, who would go on to shoot all but 2 episodes of the 2002 Twilight Zone revival as director of photography. When he wasn't featured on screen, McGuire would also serve as first assistant camera to Robert Sod. The pair would next shoot Shivers for David Cronenberg in 1975, followed by Death Weekend for William Freud in 1976. Gloria returns, stopping to give some unsolicited advice on the way.
You know, you shouldn't play with that thing. You might hurt yourself.
When Cliff and Gloria leave, the mechanic approaches the sheriff of town, who's leaning on a payphone nearby, and lets him know about the man who is asking around about his sister. The sheriff concludes that something must be done.
I guess we'd better take care of him, eh?
And calls over to Mouse, the clumsy knife aficionado. Cliff and Gloria arrive at the motel where they are met by Mrs. Wainwright, played by Mae Jarvis, no relation to Tommy. It is here that she tells them of the legend of the 3 girls.
They were cannibals, and they ate men.
This legend takes us on an extended flashback sequence that's over 15 minutes long.
All we ever do around here is cook and eat.
It shows the titular cannibal girls, Clarissa, Leona, and Anthea, who's the sister from earlier, as they seduce and coerce 3 men to come back with them to their farmhouse. One is met on the ground? Why is this guy sleeping here? He just fell asleep on a stack of logs? Whose property is this? There's a fence there. The next is met at a tavern. Yes, a tavern, and not a set, and is convinced of some mild awkward flirting. Lastly, the third, looking to cut down his travel distance by 40 miles, is run off the road and wakes up at the farmhouse. The next morning, the men have an absolute banger of a conversation over a game of Monopoly.
What was my role before breakfast?
Sure, it's always your role. I own everything, you roll all the time.
One man, Felix, from the tavern, yes, the tavern, is an ice cream truck driver.
He's president of Truck 12.
Another, Rick, is the Grand Marshal kind of thing, eh? Of Rick Parades Enterprises Incorporated.
Yeah, it's Rick Parades Enterprises Incorporated. It's me. Yeah.
And the last, Earl, simply says that he's rich. After some friendly chirping,
That's enough with the jokes, eh?
everyone sits down to dinner. Earl and Clarissa head upstairs to the bedroom for some, But before they can get it on, she stabs him with a pair of scissors. By this time, Felix and Leona have had a bit more luck, but when he gets up to leave, his luck runs out and he's met with an axe to the back. Is that knife in the bed the whole time? The bodies are brought downstairs, chopped up, and put in the freezer. The next morning, Rick and Anthea build a snowman together, and afterwards she lays into him with a clean check. Rick wakes up to find himself in a stressful round of Gerald's game. The Cannibal girls enter, and after a quick garnish, prove that they're true to their namesake. Our flashback ends jarringly, and Mrs. Wainwright tells Cliff and Gloria that their farmhouse still exists, but that it's now a restaurant. She agrees to take them there later that night for dinner. Meanwhile, the man who was looking for his sister has been tracked down by Mouse and another henchman, one played by Dave Clement, who would have a small part in Black Christmas the following year, alongside Andrea Martin. They chase him through an alley and Mouse stabs him with his pocket knife. The body is chopped up and sold at the local butcher.
Is it really fresh?
Mrs. Wilson, if it was any fresher, it would get up and tell you itself.
This butcher, credited here simply as Kingfish, was played by Fishka Rais, who some might recognize as Igor from the Canadian production The Hilarious House of Frightenstein. Cliff brings the car in to get both it and the ADR fixed.
Oh, it was rattling or knocking.
Sounds like the carburetor. Well, I'll leave it here.
Okay.
Afterwards, he and Gloria are brought by Mrs. Wainwright to the restaurant at the farmhouse. The farmhouse was in fact owned by Mae Jarvis, of the famous Jarvis family in Toronto. Jarvis Street downtown is named after her grandfather. She also of course played Mrs. Wainwright, and was more than happy to be in the movie. It's here that we meet the Reverend Alex St. John, played by Ron Ulrich. Ulrich chews through dialogue the entire time he's on the screen.
Ron was an actor.
Right.
You know, Ron was a theatrical actor, and he was good. I mean, Ron was good.
The Reverend sits Cliff and Gloria down at the table, and Cliff makes a calculated decision about their order.
There's only one item on the menu.
Yes, Clifford. I think you'll enjoy what we have prepared for you.
Well, we'll have two.
They stay late enjoying drinks. It's $2.50 for a highball, and $1.50 for a beer. When they get up to leave, the Reverend offers to let them spend the night.
Please, I have an old bed upstairs. It's ancient, but it's comfortable.
The drinks, and a crash of thunder, convinces them to stay. After the Reverend says the words blood and red,
Red, the blood of life.
a number of times, he enters Cliff and Gloria's bedroom. They wake to find themselves in a stressful round of Gerald's game. Kai is a wheel after all, and the Reverend hypnotizes Gloria.
It's time to drink the blood of life.
But she resists and tears off out of the house towards the woods. She makes it out to the road unharmed and stops a passing car. The driver claims to be a doctor and gives Gloria a sedative to calm her down. She reminds us what decade it is because she has no problem taking drugs from a stranger. Gloria fades away to sleep and she wakes up... What? Back at the hotel? In the same clothes? The entire restaurant segment was a dream? We've gone back a full day. Time jumps are $2.50 for a decade and $1.50 for a year. And Cliff tells the groggy Gloria that he took the car in to get it fixed.
Gloria, are you stoned?
They go out for a walk on a sidewalk that's too small for Cliff's afro and end up arguing about the pronunciation of Toronto.
I want to take a bus back to Toronto.
Okay, take a bus back to Toronto.
You'd let...
When you do need to know the pronunciation, who are you gonna call? The bus station, of course. But she doesn't like his pronunciation either.
Next Toronto bus leaves at 10:30 tomorrow morning.
Oh, no.
They make up after the shortest fight in history and continue on their very casual, not unusual walk. This little date scene was part of reshoots shot in Beaverton, Ontario. The rest of the majority of the film was shot in and around Richmond Hill, just outside of Toronto. The town sheriff rolls up and accuses them of loitering, and of being hippies and freaks.
We don't fancy much of strangers around here, especially hippies and freaks.
He picks them up and asks them where they need to go. Cliff says he could go for something to eat, and the sheriff brings them back to the farmhouse. If I didn't know this whole movie was improvised, I would swear that was a script in his back pocket. Gloria is hesitant, but they enter the farmhouse restaurant anyway. Her suspicions are assured immediately when the Reverend and the Cannibal girls enter and thank Cliff for bringing Gloria back to them. Hold on a second. So this doctor, who's working with the Reverend the whole time, drugs Gloria and brings her back to the hotel when she's passed out and puts her back into the same clothes she was wearing the day before, when he could have drugged her and brought her to the Reverend.
Are you stoned?
The Reverend uses what I'll call cannibal mind control on Gloria, and he influences her to dispose of Cliff. Gloria picks up the medieval flail that's on the end table, and without so much as a rally to me, swings it into Cliff's gut, killing him. Their next scene's sitting down to dinner, Cliff Tartar, and it's $2.50 for an eyeball, and $1.50 for an ear. We conclude with Mrs. Wainwright finishing her regaling of the legend of the 4 girls to a new, unsuspecting couple traveling through. After shooting 9 16-hour days in a row, Reitman and Goldberg realized their film was only 65 minutes long and didn't really make much sense. They decided to beg, borrow, and steal to get the funding to complete their movie. This is where Reitman says that their artistic sensibilities kicked in and got in the way of their true goal, which was to make it fast and cheap, even if it was terrible, as the production had ballooned into nearly 20 days and put them almost $100,000 in debt. It was around this time that they went to the Canadian Film Development Corporation for some extra funding. The CFDC, which is now Telefilm Canada, told them that they didn't think their film was very commercial, and so they were declined.
I think they said this is not very commercial, and it's also not very good.
But they also learned that the CFDC had recently started a program to get Canadian films shown at the Cannes Film Festival in France. Seeing this as a last-ditch effort to try to recoup some of the money, Cannes became the new plan. But Pathé was starting to get nervous. Reitman and Goldberg owed them a lot of money, and the festival was only a few months away. They held fast and told Pathé that they wouldn't get any of their money back if the movie remained unfinished. Fearing Pathé would try to claim ownership of the film from them entirely, Goldberg began keeping at least 2 rolls of negatives of the film in his car at all times, so Pathé would never truly have a finished version all at once. Armed with a $1,000 check from his dad and some publicity materials, Reitman got on a plane to France with his girlfriend, who would eventually become his wife, leaving the completion of the film in Goldberg's hands. They had set up a deal with the National Film Board of Canada to get the film through customs and to Cannes as quickly as possible, so long as it was finished on time. The CFDC had gotten them 3 screenings, so Reitman got the rumor mill rumbling and started setting up posters. Illegally, of course, the advertising spots were way too expensive, for his yet unfinished film, Cannibal Girls. The festival was now a week away, and Goldberg had just finished the titles, when Harold Greenberg told him that he wasn't going to let the film go unless they signed the North American distribution rights to the movie over to Pathé. Having just worked on this film for the past 2 years, Goldberg was not going to stand for this. This movie needed to be at the NFB yesterday, so he slapped them with an ultimatum of his own.
And I said, I'm going to drive the negative off the cliff, goodbye. I don't care, I've been working on this for 2 years. I'm not going to take this from you.
Stunned, Pathé released the film to Goldberg, who promptly brought it to the NFB and put it on a plane. The film was placed into the hands of a very nervous Reitman a mere 30 minutes before their first screening. It was 1973 and Reitman and Goldberg had had very little to no communication before the film arrived, so Reitman didn't even know if the movie would get there. Of the approximately 15 people present at the screening, one was a representative from American International, and he told Reitman that he thought Sam Arkoff should see his movie.
And for me, Sam Arkoff, he was like the god because
God.
He and
James H. Nicholson.
James Nicholson ran American International Pictures, and it was the great B picture releasing organization of an entire generation.
Also the movies when we went to see.
Arkoff was present at the next screening, and he told Reitman to come and meet him at the legendary Hotel du Cap, where he was staying.
And it's this extraordinary hotel on the tip of the Mediterranean, and it's probably one of the most expensive hotels in the world. They lead me to the biggest suite at the hotel because he was the #1 guy. And the suite is full of people milling about, it's busy, and there's Sam. He says, okay, kid, come with me into the bedroom.
In the bedroom of the penthouse, Arkoff told Reitman that he was willing to offer them $50,000 up front, as well as 20% of the gross after they broke even. And Reitman made sure that AIP held up their end of the bargain.
And he's got this fresh orange juice glass with a Hotel du Cap napkin underneath it. And he moves the orange juice. He takes up this big fat ballpoint pen and he writes $50,000. He gives it to me like this. And I said, would you mind signing it?
After Cannibal Girls, Reitman would join Andre Link and John Dunning at Cinepix and begin producing. He would produce Canadian horror classics such as William Fruit's Death Weekend and David Cronenberg's Shivers and Rabid. From there, he would co-produce John Landis' Animal House and would shortly after direct Meatballs in 1979 and Stripes in 1981, both of which would feature an actor named Bill Murray in some of his earliest starring roles. Then, he would direct a little movie called Ghostbusters in 1984, and that would skyrocket him into a very successful career, one that still continues to this day. Dan Goldberg would produce Meatballs and Stripes for Reitman, as well as his film Junior in 1984. He would then be responsible for a series of sex comedies through the 2000s, films like Old School and Eurotrip, as well as the very successful Hangover and Hangover 2. These would follow in the wake of American Pie and its sequels, all of which would prominently feature Johnny Rose himself, Eugene Levy, in a role for which he would become famously known. Cannibal Girls is a comedic footnote in Canadian horror history, and one that definitely encapsulates the decade it depicts. Its deep-rooted Canadian themes such as fear of isolation and fear of having to be anywhere near Toronto make it essential viewing for the Canuxploitation cannibal in all of us. Until next time, I've been RJ, this has been Killer Canuck, and thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this episode of Canadian Horror History. If you liked what you saw, be sure to drop a like and hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RealKillerCanuck. If you like the tune playing in the background, be sure to check out Prodouji on SoundCloud and at noiserecords.com. Link in the description. Who's your favorite Canadian director? Let me know in the comment section. Until next time.